Well, welcome again, and let me introduce our speaker. Joining us today from San Antonio, Texas, Phil Kang is 1991 MBA graduate from the Smith School, a career coach, and a Fortune 100 executive. As Phil and I were talking before today, I was intrigued not only by your experience and vision as an executive, but also by your interesting take on career development as the author of a book with quite an interesting title too, Oppositivity. And I will share the link to the book in the chat. I'm excited about all the things we are about to hear. And please, Phil, the Zoom is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Philip. That's not confusing at all that you have a host called Philip and a speaker called Phil. It's a good thing Montserrat has a slightly different name. Well, welcome everybody. I'm super excited to be here with you today. As we were warming up before the call, I mentioned that we're not sure if we're going to provide anything spectacularly new about the resume, but I do believe that we'll have some different ways of thinking about how to leverage the resume. So we'll get into that in just a second. Here's a little bit more about what Philip was mentioning about my background. Some things to call out here is, I've been a hiring manager of many countless employees. I've also, of course, interviewed myself for positions along the way, served at relatively high levels in some pretty big companies. So I think I know a few things about what a good resume looks like. And along my almost 4 decades of work, I also believe that I've misused my own resume. And so today's webinar is really about additional ways of leveraging the resume. I want us to use our resume in the fullest way possible. It's another way of saying this is it's more than a job hunting tool. It's more than a way to get in the front door of a company so that we can interview well. It's much more than this. And so this might be the twist that would be new for some of us on the call today. Philip also mentioned the book that I have written. It's called Oppositivity. And I'll just say a word about that. The book is the title is a mashup of do the opposite with positivity. And the book is full of sort of learnings over this career of mine. And it's framed in a coaching type of conversation where I don't have all the answers for you, but at least I offer a push on the alternative way of thinking about life, about thinking about leadership, about thinking about managing up or influencing people or getting things done. That's what the book is essentially about. And that theme plays through today as well. We're going to think about the resume in a slightly opposite way. And that's why I call out the book and be happy to discuss that further, even in our Q&A. Philip mentioned that I live in San Antonio. I'm speaking to you now from Seattle. I have 2 grown daughters who live in the Seattle, Washington area. And my wife and I live in San Antonio, Texas, and we've flown here last night to spend some time with them. So we're very excited to be in cooler Seattle, Washington today. It's really awesome. So that's a little bit about me. I hope to also learn a little bit about you in the course of our conversation today. So we'll keep this kind of casual. Philip knows that if we see something in chat come up, he's going to break in and just say, "Hey, Phil, we need to answer this question right now." But we will have a well-reserved, lengthy Q&A slot at the end. So feel free to hold a question till the end, or if you just have to get it out, we'll take that in chat and we'll break in wherever we need to. So again, informal conversation about this idea of opportunities from our resume. So here's our thesis for today's talk. I believe that the resume is much more than a job seeking tool. It's a tool for changing our lives. It's a way to focus and a way to think about ourselves in a way that perhaps we haven't before. Today's webinar is not going to be about how to write a great resume. It's not going to be tips and tricks. And on the next slide, I'm going to share with you some of the things we're not going to talk about. but we're really having a conversation today about a different angle to consider. We are talking about how to get something more from our resume than we have currently. And what I intend for our time together is to make this an action-oriented conversation. I will push you at the end to take action. That's what I mean by action-oriented. You will do something differently as a result of today's webinar. Number two is I do want this to be interactive. So you are expected to share your ideas, and I'll ask you questions, and you'll be interacting. This won't be a one-way conversation. Along the way, I'm going to share some trivia. So how many webinars are going to have little history lessons or maybe a joke interlaced? That's the flavor of today's conversation. So let's have some fun. Here's something to start us off with. I was sending a note to another Maryland alum friend of mine, and I said, hey, I'm going to do this thing about resumes. And this is the text message I got back. We're well past the days of needing resumes, ha ha ha. And what's laced in this response from my friend was, I don't need to go to a webinar about resumes because I'm in a pretty good spot. I have a secure job. And maybe that's running true for many of us on my call today. I don't really need it. I'm kind of curious. But the point of the conversation today is not about the traditional need of the resume, as I've mentioned. It's something much, much deeper than that. So we're going to get into this. But I want to start by asking you a kind of an important question. We're going to start a poll here. Philip's got a poll that's going to pop up. But when did you last update your resume? And so we're going to ask you to click on a box and tell us when. When's the last time you updated? Interesting. I can see the results. Philip, are you able to share that with the audience? All right, we'll share it with everybody and have a little chat. So half of us have updated a resume in the last month. That's terrific. And then as we might expect, it's been a while for some of us, maybe within the last year for a third, within the last 3 years. And then a few of us, it's been so long that we can't remember the last time we updated a resume, which is fantastic as well. Very honest, open answers. I appreciate this across the board. This tells me that there are many of us that are actively updating, using our resume, and perhaps, again, maybe some of us are actually using it for a purpose other than job hunting. Others of us, maybe it's been such a long time that this might serve as a reminder that we need to get back in there and we need to be updating and using our resume, again, more than just a job hunting tool. So thank you for your participation in the poll. I think it'll be eye-opening for us. Here is some things we unfortunately won't be discussing today. We could talk about any of these things. Again, I've seen a resume or two in my day, so we could talk about all of these topics maybe another day, and maybe in our discussion at the end of the hour. But I would say these are things that we could get online. You and I could do a internet search and get answers to all of these things. And my purpose today is to use our time wisely. I value your time, and I want to provide something of different value, differentiated value for you. So I do have on a topic here is a question for you. What's the purpose of the resume? What is the main purpose? So I'm going to invite Philip to put another poll up online. But you can choose your top 2 answers to these things. What's the purpose of the resume? It's fun watching the data come in. From my side, I get to see the bar chart move and slide, and as people are changing their minds, perhaps. We've got about 3/4 of us responding already. We'll give it another couple of seconds, and then we'll close this out. Ooh, we're almost at 90% participation. All right, Philip, let's share the results with our colleagues online. So the purpose of the resume, perhaps clearly and obviously, it's to introduce ourselves. We want to state what our qualifications are to the world and to future employers. Certainly, part of this is about our intent to apply. When we send a resume to someone, we are saying to them, we're interested. Very good. The resume is certainly a record. It's a historical record. It says, here's the jobs that I've had, the schools I've attended, the certifications I've accomplished, all of that. Very good. Maybe a lesser one, and several of you are seeing this as well, is to provide data. A lot of data is contained within a resume. So companies, perhaps HR departments, not least of which, they're interested in scanning resumes to understand what's going on in the marketplace. What are the qualifications that people are bringing? So a great intention and a necessary need for the resume is to collect data from what the workforce and what trends are happening. I am curious, this is where audience participation comes in. Several of us, 5% of us said other. What are the other reasons for the resume? And I'd love to have you unmute or chat or just tell us, what were you thinking when you said other? I see a raised hand.
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Sorry, I apologize for my appearance. But the other actually fits in with some of the items that you had on the list. But the way I view resumes is I view them as a tool to gain somebody's attention, right? And whatever way it is that you're, conveying this information, whatever the purpose of it is, ultimately what you want to do is grab somebody's attention so that you can have their time and then give them all of this information in a way that sort of meets their needs in the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate getting people's attention with the tool, which is the resume. It's an additional angles, perspective on the resume for sure. Yeah, we do want to declare our intent. We want to summarize our history, and we also want to get their attention. That's really good. Other thoughts from the group that have said something else that is distinct from those other things on the survey? What else was out there for you?
We have one in the chat that already got one like as well. Accomplishments relevant to organization and role.
Okay. That's good too. Yeah, I think it does fold into the earlier options. That is, we are declaring our intent. We also want to highlight our skill set, our accomplishments. All of that does fit in nicely with what was just stated there. Thank you. Yeah, here's how I see this, and I agree with all of your statements so far, folks. I also want us to see that the resume has a forward-looking perspective. And here's my cute little graphic. It's obviously a rearview mirror. All resumes have sort of this in common, if you will. It's a backwards-looking view. It's typically dated from the most recent activity, the current job, going backwards in time. So we are looking at our life, our career, our progress from a backwards perspective. And backwards is good. When I'm driving, I like to have a backwards view so I can see where I've been. I can see who's coming up behind me, right? That a backwards view is fantastic. It's good for defensive driving. There's nothing wrong with it. But do we drive our cars primarily using our rearview mirror? I think not. So what I want us to do is to consider the resume as our forward windshield, not only our rearview mirror. So with that, I say that the bottom line up front, if we have to leave the webinar right now, take this away. The bottom line is, let's shift our resume from a historical record to a forward-looking provocation. Use the resume to look forward into our windshield to see ahead into where we're going, as opposed to behind where we have been. And with that, here's actually the agenda for today's conversation. I want to call out 4 principal things that the resume could do that is effectively a forward-looking perspective. 1, it's declarative. 2, differentiating. 3, diagnostic, and 4, decision support. And just briefly on number 4, what I mean by decision support is if my resume can be used as a tool to decide what I am to do going forward, as opposed to a tool to simply advertise or provoke or highlight my historical accomplishment. And we'll get to all 4 of these. Then I want to do an application discussion. I mentioned that today will be action oriented. So I will ask you to decide what you will do to apply our learning today. And then we will have, again, a healthy time at the end for a discussion, Q&A and rebuttal. Even you can provoke me if you like. All right, so that's our agenda for today. All right, so the first thing is declarative, and it's early June now, and you guys, at least Americans here on the call, will know what happens on July 4th is the Independence Day for the United States of America. This is a very famous painting. Remember I said we'd have some trivia. The painter is known as John Trumbull, and this is a very famous painting. It's called the Declaration of Independence. And we all know, of course, that this is a painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, right? Wrong, actually. This is not a painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, even though that's the title. This is a painting of the Second Continental Congress. They met to review a draft, a pre-work of the Declaration of Independence that was eventually signed on July 4th, right? Wrong again, actually. This Declaration of Independence was never signed on July 4th. It was signed on August the 2nd. So we celebrate our declaration not on the day when it's actually signed, but on the day that we declared our independence. One other kind of interesting thing about this painting is the original painting is 12 by 18 feet in dimension. So what I say to that is it's a huge statement, literally. The painting declares in large form what Americans stood for back in that day. And so what I say about declarative, if we said nothing else about this, is it should declare something bold. It should be more than a, here's what I've done in my history. Here's what my hobbies and skill sets are. It's more than that. It needs to declare something. And we're going to get to this even deeper in a moment. You know some of the people in this painting, by the way. You'll notice in the center, standing about the table, are Franklin and Jefferson and Adams. And if you didn't know that the gentleman seated in the chair in the foreground, that's John Hancock. And you'll remember that John Hancock is the one that we say, hey, give us your John Hancock. That's this John Hancock, right? He's the president of this Continental Congress, and he's the one that's receiving those draft papers of the Declaration of Independence. So I'll ask you this, and perhaps you can add this in chat or unmute. What adjectives come to mind when you think about the Declaration of Independence? What adjectives come to mind when you think of this occasion? Patriotism, I see that. Bold, confident, definitive, direct, unity, legal document, celebration. There's bold again, goals, fantastic. Yeah, you guys are right there. Bold is actually the very first thing I thought of. The Declaration of Independence is bold. The second word I thought of was unifying. So I love that you guys are right there with me. I also added that it is clear. It was crisp. It may not have been completely understood by its receivers, but it was very clear in its statement. This is what we believe as a unified states of America. And I would also add that it's timeless. The Declaration of Independence has the Declaration. Sorry, sounds like we have somebody unmuted. Were you trying to jump in with a comment? Okay. So timeless in the sense that the Declaration has stood the test of time. And so the gentleman in this painting who thought ahead may not have even realized, but 250 years later, this Declaration still represents the core and essence of the United States. So my question to you, as we think about declarative, what am I declaring about myself? What am I declaring about myself when I put my resume out there? Am I saying something about what I want to achieve with my life? Am I stating where my grand vision is for my contribution to myself and to the company I would work for? I want us to consider how we should be using our resume to declare something about myself. Furthermore, I wanted to spend a minute here talking about the words inside of the Declaration of Independence. The famous words you've heard: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we have unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We'll remember those words, right? We've heard them before. It was James Madison actually said this. He says the object here was to assert, not to discover truth. And what he's saying here is we are asserting ourselves when we are declaring these words. And that's what I want us to do with our resume. See it as a way to assert who we are, who we think about, and who we want to be. Now I'll wrap it up here on the declarative piece with a couple of things. One is, first of all, I want us to notice the last words. These are the last couple sentences of the Declaration, and perhaps less famous than the ones previously quoted. I highlighted in red a couple of things. We, the nation, will have the power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, and so on. And we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, our sacred honor. What do you notice about the wording here? Happy to have a chat or an unmute. Yet to me, the way these words resonate is they are action oriented and they are forward. We will have power to levy war, conclude peace, establish commerce. The Declaration is not just a rear spacing viewpoint, it's a forward. This is what independence means for us as a nation. And this is what we will do. We will support each other with our lives, is what this Declaration states. And so our resume should be nothing less. We need to declare what we will do. So I want you to think about, even in this moment, what message are you sending with your declaration? All right, I'm going to move us forward to a little shift in tone. We go from serious Declaration of Independence to this guy. Who knows who this is? He happens to be wearing terrapin colors almost. This is, let me see, I'm going to check chat. Yes, Waldo. Where is Waldo? Yes. So actually, this is Waldo if you're from the United States or Canada, but this is actually originally Wally. Wally is a character created by an English illustrator called Martin Hanford. This is in the late 80s. And by the way, Waldo has sold more than 73 million books. It's been translated into 26 languages and published in 50 countries. So quite the impression that Wally's made. Here, if you don't know Waldo or Wally, the reader is challenged to find Wally in a page or many pages where there are many friends in that page, and all our job is as the reader is to find him. And you would identify Wally as having this red and white striped shirt, and he has this bobble hat, and he has this special round glasses. And the way that the author writes the Waldo books is he intentionally creates red herrings. There are other red striped objects in the picture. At the end of the day, here's what's going on with Wally. He tries to differentiate himself by wearing the red striped shirt, and he wears the special red striped hat. But inside of the individual pages of the Waldo books, he disappears. I say that our resume is much like Waldo in this way. We're not really differentiating ourselves from one another. We are looking like everything else in the picture. And I will say this as a recovering executive and a hiring manager, when I see resumes, they tend to look and feel the same. They might use resume speak, such as strategic thinker, detail-oriented, results-driven. And after one sees so many resumes that look like that, we all tend to have Waldo-looking resumes. So what separates me from other candidates? This is where differentiating comes into play. We need to write and author a resume that helps us stand apart, that truly looks different. Even Waldo, believing that he looks different, needs to be different. So we need to figure this out. Is my resume trying to fit a mold? If it is, what if that mold is not what that hiring manager wants? I say this, let's double down on our uniqueness, our special talent, our superpower, and let's highlight that in our resume in a way to differentiate us from every other candidate. I would submit, choose language in our resume that helps to differentiate and help us to really stand out. Too many resumes all look the same. Let's make ourselves stand out. What are some ideas that you might have or we might have to differentiate ourselves? I'll offer a couple of ideas. One thing I would suggest is starting by assessing our strengths. There are many tools out there for doing so. Perhaps it's using values cards, assessment tools like Clifton Strengths, Myers-Briggs, Insights, whatever the tool of choice would be, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with those. Go and find out what your value strengths are. And from that place, that might offer you a way to look at yourself as a way to differentiate. If I'm a super introvert, and by the way, maybe Phil here is a super introvert. If we're a super introvert, double down on that and write my resume such that my powers of analytical thinking and introversion and reflective thought come out in my resume, as opposed to sounding like I'm the every person that everybody else wants. Talk about what I am, but start by assessing who I really am. It might also be necessary to differentiate our skill set. It might be obvious from our skill set, but look at the resume for yourselves and figure out what skill you need to develop to truly differentiate yourself. Maybe there's a fashionable skill set that's out there currently. I don't know, AI comes to mind. Perhaps if everybody's offering an AI skill set, I need to turn that a little bit and figure out how to make that really hum so that it stands out on my resume as being truly differentiating from everybody else's AI skill set. I believe that personal connectivity with other leaders, other professionals is a key thing, a key way to differentiate. We need to work on that. We could spend an entire webinar just on networking skill sets, so I'll leave it there for right now. Personal brand is another thing. If I asked you, what is your personal brand statement? I would expect you to have a differentiated story on who you are, the thing that separates you from everybody else that I might ask that same question. By the way, a little personal story. I was asked that question 2/3 of the way into my career. I happened to be at a very large technology company at the time, and somebody I was meeting, networking with to find my next job, they asked me about my personal brand statement, and I had no idea how to answer the question. I didn't know who I was. I couldn't describe it in 30 seconds. That leader explained to me his personal brand statement, and I was so impressed that it demonstrated to me that he was different. He had thought about who he is and clarified in a very cogent statement what that was. He taught me how to do this. Long story short is I developed my personal brand, and I leveraged that actually to land my next role, which ended up being one of my favorite jobs of all time for a great leader, one of the favorite managers I've ever had all time. So I say, work your personal brand, make it a differentiator for you. One more thing on Waldo before we leave him. We talked about red herrings, the red striped shirt. Sometimes we have things in our resume that might be red herrings. We're throwing our reader off. We're even trying to confuse them inadvertently about who we really are. So examine the resume, understand that we need to bring clarity as we differentiate our skills, our background, and our attention to those that are reading our resume. All right. I'm going to move us to the third thing, the diagnostic tool side of the resume. I can't help but share this with you. I happen to have two daughters. One of them is a surgeon. She's a physician, and she uses this tool and as a normal part of her practice. Right, so she knows how to use a scalpel, and she knows how to use sutures, and she knows how to use this relatively basic tool called the stethoscope. Doctors use all kinds of sophisticated technologies to help us heal. MRI, they use AI, virtual reality. My daughter actually uses robotics to remotely do surgical work, which is amazing to think about. But why do doctors still use the basic old-fashioned stethoscope? Because doctors leverage their old-fashioned senses of sight and smell and sound when they are diagnosing our health. It's a critical piece of how medicine is still done. So I would ask you to do this. Consider the resume an old-fashioned tool that will indicate a lot about who we are, about what we are missing, and what could bring us back to health. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. So a diagnostic tool, the resume, if it's a diagnostic, might be something like this. Something might be missing from my resume. So let's zoom out, step back from our details of the resume, and ask ourselves to examine our lives, our contribution, and our forward impact in a different way. I've read, for example, people write in their resumes that I'm a lifelong learner. I would say this, let's look at the resume. If one says they are a lifelong learner and the last learning thing that is indicated on the resume is the bachelor's degree some 20 years ago, then there is not a pattern of continuing education showing up on the resume. So the diagnostic tool says to myself, well, I say that I'm a lifelong learner, but I've not gone to, say graduate school or gotten this certification or continually demonstrated through the course. And in that way, the resume serves as a diagnostic for oneself to rethink what they are really doing. Another example, some people say that they are big impact players. I leave big impact on the org. Well, perhaps as we zoom out from the resume and we see that the resume is missing impact statements, it's missing, say, revenue numbers that back up the impact that we claim to have made. Perhaps if we say that we're impactful leaders, where are the growth indicators on the resume about the people that we've developed, or the scale at which we have changed, transformed an organization? Again, an honest look at the resume should serve as a diagnostic tool for changing the way that we behave going forward. I actually am the person guilty of saying I'm a lifelong learner, and I looked at my resume and I noticed that I hadn't been going back to school. And what I did in that moment is I committed to picking something that I would do. I signed up for some online evening kinds of coursework, Eventually, I ended up doing a whole bunch of other academic work to support this, but it was my resume that sparked the forward motion. So it served as a great diagnostic tool for me. One more little trivia. The stethoscope was invented in France in the early 1800s. And it wasn't actually this thing that we see on screen. It was actually a wooden tube. This doctor who invented this listening device to listen to a person's heart. The reason why the stethoscope was invented is because this doctor wanted to listen to a woman's chest, but he was not comfortable placing his ear directly on the woman. And that's why he, out of necessity, invented this wooden tube. Pretty clever, I would have to say. All right, so we've talked about declarative, differentiating, diagnostic. The fourth and final D is decision support. So obviously, we're thinking about our careers. We're constantly thinking about our job, maybe our next job. Am I in the right job? So one decision certainly that the resume can help us with is, when should I take on a new role or company? So again, decision support might be this. Zooming back from the details of the resume, we might notice that we have been in role longer, perhaps, than we originally intended. Time has passed and we maybe have gotten comfortable in that particular spot. So we might say, I want to limit my tenure at any given company or position or level to a certain amount. And when the question might be that if I've surpassed my original goal, I need to go out there and make that change. So let's use the resume to support the decision to move on. I also believe that the resume can support us in more tactical as well. So let's say that you have a tough work decision. What's a tough work decision? Maybe it is should I fund a particular project? Should I fire a particular employee? You can think of a tough work decision. What I would suggest and submit to you is you can pull out of your desk drawer the resume and read it to yourself as you're facing that tough decision. And as you see your own words on that page, you might find a new awareness about how to tackle that very specific work decision. So in the example, should I fire that particular employee? Perhaps your vision statement that you've included in your resume includes growing people, developing talent, maybe rehabilitating talent as part of your core skill set. It's a refresher, it's a reminder about how you think about yourself and how you think about your profession, and it might help you in that moment to support the decision you wish to make. Here's another one. I don't know about you, but I've been tapped on the shoulder countless times in my career. My boss has said, I want you to take on this new project. What I would say is we generally say, okay, boss, since you trust me with it, I will do it. I would suggest pausing momentarily, pulling up the resume, seeing what aspiration I have, perhaps even the skill sets that I honestly have or don't have, and leverage the information in the resume to decide whether or not I say yes or no to the boss when asked to take on that new project. Perhaps the best decision of all is to turn down that marquee project because it doesn't fit with my vision or my skill set or my passion. So again, decision support. What examples can you think of? I'd love to have some participation, either in chat or unmute. What is a decision that you might be up against in your workplace where your resume could help offer a viewpoint on that decision? What are your thoughts?
I think we've got a good one in the chat from Claudia, and she says, use resume as a guide to see how that decision aligns with your trajectory of professional ethics. Is that what you mean?
That's awesome. Claudia, that's fantastic. Yes. Yeah, your resume speaks to your standard that you are all about ethics, and if that's what it says, and then we have a tough thing going on at work, then that reminds us and reinforces how we should move forward with that action. Fantastic example. Thanks, Claudia. And I'm also seeing the chat now, Philip. Torin is saying, switching between business lines, moving from technology to strategy. Yes, so the resume, again, as we see it as a decision support tool, can help us to decide whether or not we should make that switch. It's fantastic, Torin. Thank you. All right, we'll have opportunity in our Q&A discussion time to continue on this vein as well. I would like to move us to that application discussion. So I promised you that I would incite action. So here's what I want you to consider. One, and I remember that some of us have been looking at our resume within the last month or so, or even the last couple of months. But if we are looking for a job or not, update your resume. And certainly the way I say this is because of the 4 things we talked about. I want you to update your resume, not just with your latest job delivery or your latest dates and times. I want you to update your resume with your declarative, with your differentiators, with the thing that you learned from today's conversation. Go back in and have a fresh look at your resume and update it. And especially if you're not job hunting. I know, again, in the warm-up, we talked about some of us are here today just to listen for tips and tricks on resume. We're not really looking for a new job. My bottom line up front point here is my talk today is not about job hunting. It's about using the resume for something more powerful to even shift my life. If I can use my resume to turn my life into a different direction, that is the power to me of the resume. So go back, update your resume, force yourself to answer and ask the question, what am I doing and why is that so? A second thing I would provoke you to do is ask your boss to review and provide feedback on your resume. And I am particularly in this ask, why am I asking your boss to look at your resume? I don't want my boss to see my resume, because if I ask my boss, that's telling the boss that I might be looking for a job elsewhere. This is part of my point. I want you to build, if you don't have it already, a psychological safety with your boss. Seek your boss's counsel, perspective, and you sharing the idea that you're working your resume should, in my view, be a more natural conversation. We should let our bosses know that we're thinking about the declarative, differentiating, diagnostic, and decision support. And the reason why I want your viewpoint, boss, is because I value it and because I want to use my resume as a powerful decision-making tool, not just for finding jobs. That's why I say, find a way to build a conversation with your boss. Number 3, notice a gap and then close it. I referred earlier in our conversation to continuous learning, and that was the gap that I had seen in my own resume. That may be yours may be something else. Notice a gap and do something about it. Take action on the thing that you feel that you are missing. 4th and final application. I want you to be the boss, be a reviewer for somebody else's resume. Find at least one person, somebody you know and trust, ask the person, you know, when's the last time you've looked at your resume? Have you thought about the resume as a decision support tool? And have this conversation with them and be willing to step through their resume, give your best advice to make their resume stronger as well. So these are my 4 asks of you. Consider one or all as actions for you to take forward. All right, so with that, Philip, I have no idea since I haven't been looking at my watch, but it looks like we have a good amount of time for questions, answers, discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts, everyone.
We actually do have a couple of questions. Maybe if you can go one slide back, and Toren in the chat is asking, could you talk more about step 3?
Yeah, I could talk more, but Toren, do you have audio capability by chance? Would love if you would unmute and just tell us what you're thinking.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, beautiful.
Hi. Thank you so much for making the time for us today. I really appreciate it. My question is more so is, as somebody who's a former hiring manager, strategically, what do you want to see when you see those gaps? And when you say close it, do you talk about, is that kind of, you know, what did you learn during that time? What growth happened during that time, etc.? Thanks.
I think I might be reading Toren into your question. I don't mean here time gaps in the resume, say between jobs, or, you know, if there was an off year, gap year between school and profession. Is this the question?
Yeah, I think that's the way I interpreted it.
Yes. Thank you for the clarification. I should rephrase my question or my point here. When I say gap, I don't mean time gap. That's a good one too. We can address that one. I mean something missing in my resume.
So would you say skill set, capability? Okay, perfect.
It could be a capability that I'm missing, a depth of that capability. Perhaps I'll just make this up, Toren and team. I wish to be an executive leader. All right. Well, maybe I've got program management skills all over my resume. Perhaps I've got innovation work all over the resume, but I don't have strategic work in my resume. So that might be identified as a gap. I haven't done strategy, or I haven't done finance. And so whatever the thing is that you want to achieve, if it's missing, it should become glaringly obvious when we step back from our resume that that's what I'm missing. That's what I mean, Toren, is let's find that missing piece. And to fill it, it might be, I need to go to school. It could be, I need to start networking with people in those groups so that I can learn more about that domain space, perhaps without taking on that job. That's what I mean by fill the gap. I see Claudia in chat. Same offer, Claudia, if you don't mind unmuting so that all of us can kind of hear in your words your question.
Yay! Thank you so much again for this presentation and this wisdom. I have a question regarding the part of differentiating yourself and the red herrings part. So for me, in a time of political unrest that we're living right now, sometimes whatever that red herring is, or that information that we provide in our resume, for example, for me, racial equity is really important, right? And that follows my path, like of my professional path and my ethical path. But that sometimes may be perceived as a red herring, a piece of information that is received and is distracting to people who may not agree with with my political views. So how does one do that? Because I do want to differentiate myself, but in this particular time that we're living now, there's so much unrest. How does one do that? Like I tend to continue to put something down, you know, that is very me, that is that follows my ethics and my trajectory. And you know, if I don't get hired by that particular person, well, that's fine. But I also don't want to put a red herring on myself, right? So I think that would be my question. How does one handle that? Yeah,
this is complex, Claudia. Thanks for the question. I may not understand the fullness of your question. I hear you asking this, how do I double down on my brand without it being a distraction? Maybe perhaps it's what's the word I need here? It belies all of the other goodness that is present in my qualification. And so what I would say there is, again, it gets back to differentiating that D. I would say pick a lane and go with it. If the diversity, if the equity thing is your lane, I would stick with it, because I'm going to assume if I'm the hiring manager that you have, let's say great writing skills and great communication. You are a strong, people leader, you know how to run a team meeting. I'm going to assume those things. But what you're saying I don't think it's a red herring. In other words, if you can double down on the thing that you say you are and own it, that's really what it comes back to. I think that's the way I would answer your question. Like, let's just own the thing that we are. And if it distracts, that's okay. Because to me, that tells your audience that's who you really are.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Claudia.
We have another question on differentiation, I think, in the chat from David.
Yeah, I'm noticing about using it as a reason to eliminate me from consideration. I think it's a similar response here, David, is pick the lane that is something you really believe in. This comes back to being declarative. I think if the founding fathers had sort of said in a wishy-washy way, we might want to have this, or we might want to be independent from you, Great Britain, we wouldn't have stood our ground. I believe you want to pick a spot. And ultimately, here's how I look at it. If the recruiter doesn't give you the interview, then perhaps that's not a company you wanted to work for in the first place, because maybe they have enough Davids already. And you would have gotten lost in the shuffle in any event. So perhaps better to decide who we are and go with it and land in the best possible place. I'm noticing Lindsay's question about how much to include, how many jobs to include. Okay, now we're getting a little bit to the stuff we said we wouldn't talk about, but let's do it. My simple viewpoint here, first principle, most of us jam too much into the resume. Let's say the 2-page standard sort of guidance. We use very small font and we try to put lots of bullet points. I would say we generally put in too much. So my general guidance would be start cutting out historical things. So if you've been a corporate veteran for 20 years, you don't have anything in your education line except for the name of the school. You don't mention your academic clubs or your achievements or your grade point average or anything that sort of distracts from current. What have you done for me lately would be another way of phrasing this. So do less. Be super ruthless in prioritizing how you use your words in your resume. So I think we do too much. So let's include fewer jobs. Don't even include your first jobs out of college. If you've been out here in the workforce for 20 years, don't even put your first couple of companies, perhaps. Put the ones that are relevant for the position and role and aspiration that you have going forward, particularly if those original jobs are not relevant in domain to what you are trying to achieve. And your second half of your question about finishing up the resume, it'll never be finished. This is another great point to make about the resume. It's an organic document. This is why it should not be something that is written only at time of need when I need a job and otherwise stuffed in a desk drawer. It needs to be updated and refined. It's a mirror to see ourselves more clearly. So let's consider the resume never finished.
I think the next question in the chat is very interesting. This is from Jennifer. And before we get into that, I think there are so many stuff that pertains to the career development. And I'm personally very interested in what you, Jennifer, are asking about all those algorithms and what actually happens on the back. And so I'll get a sneak preview of what's going on in our alumni career shop. We trying to figure out the continuation of this series, and hopefully Phil can join us for that. That's going to be for the next semester, which is obviously after September this year. And we'll try to tap into the very specific and technological thing. I would see it as a view from the HR's desk. What happens really when we apply? What happened? What they do think. And I'll let you, Phil, answer that question, of course, right now. But for if people need to jump off because it's 1 o'clock and we reserved certainly more of your time, and we thankful for that, and we'll carry on after 1. But just a point of notice that we are in the middle of our career chat series. Next week we are having a live in-person discussion, the career breakfast with a Smith School of Business professor, and that happens in downtown Washington, D.C. at the Ronald Reagan International Trade Center building on Pennsylvania Avenue. Smith School actually has the entire UMD suite there on the concourse level. So for people who are in the area who want to join us for breakfast, you're very welcome to join. And again, we'll be putting in the chat the link to the book of our speaker. We'll be putting in the chat the link to the career series, so you can join further series and be in the know. But I will let you take it from here, Phil. Please do continue talking to us.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure the breadth of the conversation, the question that was asked in chat, and I'm not an HR person per se, so I can't tell you exactly how algorithms sift through resumes. I see it more from the receiving end. I receive a short stack based on things that are already filtered, but then of course I'm doing my filtering on top of that. I would say similarly to the way we answered other questions. If my resume has the substantial domain expertise and skill set that's necessary, for sure, there are algorithms that are out there looking for keywords. So let's make sure that we have those essentials, and not or, but and let's make sure that we have a specific point of view, that we've again chosen the lane with our resume on who we are as a leader. If you are a particularly transparent, motivational, inspirational type of leader, then demonstrate what that is. Use words in your resume to describe what that is. If you are truly an action-oriented leader, then demonstrate that with numbers. What's the revenue, quality increase, efficiency gain in numbers that demonstrate that you are that kind of leader? So again, let's use the words that back up the thing that we represent. Philip, I might be out of order here, but I'm just noticing Ronak's question.
You good?
About,
yes, that is
new professionals. We haven't been out of school that long. If we don't have tons of experience, then I again, it's still important. If you've demonstrated leadership, find a way to describe that leadership quotient through other means. And here's what I see is folks will write out, if you're just out of school and you don't have a lot of experience, people write the job description of what they had, but from a tactical perspective, here's the report that I did or the team that I participated in, and there are words in there that kind of get to the here's what my activity was. remember to have an impact view on all of those activities. If you were the treasurer for your college club, well, that's great, but that's not telling me what your impact was. What did you do as the treasurer of the club? You improved the bottom line. You saved that club X% of its annual turnover, etc. Like, figure out a way to get the most impact out of whatever activity you've had, even if it might be small from your perspective.
Phil, and I will have one more question for you. Really coming back to the very first slide about the declaration. And what struck me is, because when we talk about the resume, we always tend to think there is your resume that looks kind of into your past, and here is your cover letter that looks kind of into the future. That might be not necessarily true from your perspective. Can you talk more about that?
I think I can. First of all, on cover letter question, I don't see many cover letters, and again, maybe that's because HR is trashing them before I get to see them. I principally believe the resume is the way to get in the door and the thing that is read most. The cover letter is nice, but it's perhaps not the indispensable part. So I don't know that a cover letter bottom line is the most important piece of the intent to apply, or the sort of that side of the resume. If the cover letter, as to your question, Philip, is about describing what I want and where I want to go in the future, the bottom line of my talk today is, let's fold that into the resume. It needs to be obvious in the resume. Where am I going? What do I want? We have the purpose statement in the resume. Some of us have the, this is what I want. Well, let's tighten that up. Let's make sure it's crystal on who I am, how I'm wired, what kind of long-term impact I want to make, and let's make it unique and special to me. That's, to me, how you fold the cover letter into that purpose statement, into the resume. It should be clear to a reader that I am a man or a woman of purpose and intent. I shouldn't need a cover letter to explain that, is my premise. Not to mention, which, by the way, practically, cover letters do get separated from resumes, as I mentioned just now. So if I write it in a cover letter and people don't get to see that, I need to make sure, therefore, that it's clear and concisely written into the resume itself. So let's let the resume stand alone.
This is great. This is actually very insightful. Thank you. Any last questions we might have? And after that, we'll be saying our final statements.
Yeah, feel free to unmute again. Very informal. I did notice several people hoping for a LinkedIn connection. By the way, we could do a whole nother webinar on how to use LinkedIn in a more powerful way. But as it is, I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn. I would implore you to leverage that connection, if it's with me or with anybody else, in a proactive and continuing basis. Let's not just connect like we're just friends that peek in on each other. Let's actually have a relationship. So that's what my ask would be on LinkedIn, but happy to connect up. But any other final questions, thoughts, challenges? All right, I'm saying appreciations from folks. Thank you all very much. It's been my pleasure to spend time with every one of you. Thank you for your hard and thoughtful questions, for your engagement today. If I can help you with your careers ongoing, happy to get involved. Just let me know. And Philip, thank you for inviting me and for hosting today. It's been a true pleasure for me.
Thank you, everybody. And we will be hoping to see you at the next career chats. Go Terps. And thank you, Phil. This is very important to us.